so today I'm going to present some recent work that I've done out in the Bakken. But before I do, I thought it might be useful to provide a little context for sort of how I ended up doing this. So I was raised in a family where both art and science were important. My father was a scientist and an opera lover, and my mother was a printmaker and costume designer. And so I was the only one of the 5 kids that sort of had this dichotomy built right into me. I sort of always switched back and forth between biology and art for my entire life. I never could really decide which I wanted to do, and find that I keep switching back and forth. In high school, I devoured every biology and art course that they would offer. Again, couldn't decide. I liked them both. I just took everything I could. And then when I started college, I started as an art major, but switched and graduated as a biology major. Went on and got a master's degree in biology, and then a PhD in zoology. The graduate work in biology took me to some pretty fantastic places, very scenic locations. The PhD work was on studying penguins on remote islands south of New Zealand and in the Falklands, as pictured here. And because the camera and film were always along to help document research work, I found that when I had spare time, and if that was towards the end of the season and I had spare film, I'd be out wandering around the islands taking pictures. It also helps, of course, that there's no TV, no social media, no internet. There weren't any other distractions, so you had to make your own entertainment. So I was always taking pictures in the background, something to do. A few shots from the Falklands. Some jellyfish up close. More penguins. So there I was. I had a PhD in zoology. But alas, finding an academic job was taking way too long, so I decided I would switch gears and find a job. And it turned out that I taught myself a little bit about computers along the way. So I ended up here in Fargo as a software engineer at Great Plains Software, and worked for them for a few years before they were bought by Microsoft, and worked for Microsoft for another 12 years. So after 16 years, I decided that I'd had enough of that rat race, and quit the corporate world. So that would have been now in just about 3 years ago. Quit the corporate world to focus full time on fine art landscape photography. So I'd always been spending some time in the background as part of something to unwind from software development. I was always spending some time on art, and the medium of choice was always photography, just because it was easy and accessible. So early on, I found that taking pictures as a landscape photographer in some locations is quite easy. This is Glacier. Glacier again. But living in the Red River Valley, I had to learn to appreciate much more subtle landscapes. We don't have quite that vertical element to deal with here, and so it's a lot of dealing with the fact that the horizon is very flat. We have one more local shot. So after I spent about a year working full-time on fine art landscape photography with no real direction, I started to feel I needed to find a project to direct the work, to sort of make it much more cohesive. And it seemed logical to me that maybe I should combine some of my biology background into what I was doing in terms of trying to develop a project. So I was looking around at projects that were environmentally focused. That seemed to make a lot of sense, where I could make some statement about impacts on the environment. So I became increasingly interested in what was happening in western North Dakota. It seemed like a good candidate for an environmentally focused landscape photographer. Much of the work that was being done in the Bakken up to that point seemed to be focused on the societal or the cultural impacts of oil development. and I was much more interested in the impacts that the oil development had on the landscape itself. So I thought that provided a somewhat unique niche for me. And around the time I was looking, it turned out that the project was sort of laid out for me very handily by the Attorney General of North Dakota, who proposed that 18 extraordinary places in western North Dakota might deserve some additional attention in the process of applying for drilling permits. It wasn't that they were going to stop the drilling, but the idea was that they'd spend a little additional review around these 18 areas that were either culturally, historically, or scenically important. And the original proposal, this is not a scale that's easy to see here, but most of the colored areas around Sakakawea and the Little Missouri River, and the few patches you see sitting out here, are those areas of extraordinary interest. And it's a bit deceiving to say there are 18 areas because some of the areas are quite large, like the entire length of the Little Missouri River, from the southwest corner of the state to Lake Sakakawea is one of the areas. The entire Theodore Roosevelt National Park. So the areas are fairly expansive. The original proposal covered 1.2 million acres that were supposed to receive this additional scrutiny, if you will. They were concerned about the impact on the actual economic impact, because maybe it would slow the development. They were also worried about individual property rights. And so the final policy was actually scaled back to only impact the public lands within the original proposal. So about half of that, so about 600,000 acres are affected by the policy, which says additional scrutiny is required before the permit will be released. So the policy itself was a bit of a failure in my mind, but it was great for me because it provided a catalog of important places in the Bakken, scenically important, some historically important places. So I used that as my starting point for what I was going to do in the Bakken. And the idea was that I would photograph, document the extraordinary places and any nearby oil developments. So look at what the risks were to those extraordinary places, especially since the policy seemed to be a bit weaker than perhaps it should be. The mechanism I decided to use, I could, in some cases, photograph the extraordinary place with oil machinery in the same frame. Decided that that was probably a little bit too blatant of a statement, and so I've actually gone more towards informal pairings, if you will, diptychs of pictures of the extraordinary place taken as a landscape photographer, and then just turn one side or the other and take pictures of nearby oil development to indicate the risks that are nearby. So this map is out on the table out there, but it's still probably not a scale that you can really see. It is available on the Oil and Gas Division's website, so it's publicly available. Some of the places that are on here, just run through a couple of them that I haven't really focused on much. This is White Butte, which is down in Slope County, the highest point in North Dakota. So I've got to go in the right direction. Black Butte, which is really just across the road from White Butte. You can see them both at once. It was thought to be the highest point in North Dakota until they went out and measured. Pretty Butte, which is also in Slope County, way out near the border, almost to Montana. There are about 7 or 8, depending on how you count, buttes included in the list. Most of the buttes are south of I-94, in areas where there's not that much development occurring. So in many cases, I don't have that many shots of the buttes because I elected to spend most of my time in this first year on locations that are between I-94 and essentially Lake Sakakawea, which is here. So it's the run of the Little Missouri from Medora, essentially to Lake Sakakawea, where I spent most of my time. There's still a couple of buttes included here on the west side of Theodore Roosevelt National Park, Sentinel Butte, Camel's Hump. and West Twin. But like I say, the 8 buttes that are on the list, most of them are in the southern part of the state and not at that much risk, because not that much development's occurring south of I-94, except for one little pocket way down in the southwest. But this is interesting because it has a lot of very important scenic areas, and of course, just to the north of this is Watford City and Williston, and they're right in the epicenter of most of the development. So, depending on where you go along this rather long swath, you can find a fair amount of impact. So, most of what I'm going to do from here on is essentially show you the brick and mortar gallery presentations that have appeared in a couple spots. The brick and mortar exhibits are designed to have some text or didactic material that explains what fracking is and a number of other things, and so I'll try and interject some of that stuff. I'm not going to put the text up, but I'll try and interject some of that stuff up here. And it also has a couple cases where I've taken from the Oil and Gas Division's website maps, GPS maps, GIS maps of the actual well location. So we'll start with the south unit of Theodore Roosevelt National Park, a couple of landscape shots, some bison crossing the Little Missouri near Wayne Canyon. Probably the most accessible spot in the south unit is Painted Canyon Overlook. This is a wayside rest on I-94. I hadn't stopped there to photograph. It was at the end of a 16-hour day, and I'd stopped there for dinner. But the clouds started rolling in. I was like, oh, I better set up the camera. Really hadn't intended to take anything. I was pretty tired of shooting by that time. So remember this fantastic spot. And this is one of the maps of oil wells. So the area that I've colored in yellow is the south unit of the park. All of these dots represent wells. Some of the hollow ones represent dry holes. Painted Canyon is essentially here. I-94 runs just south of it. Note all the oil development that lies just south of Painted Canyon. You should also note quite a bit of development right along the northern border of the park. Matters for the next shot. So this is within the park on the Loop Road. This is the Boycott Overlook. This is looking to the southwest. On the same road, looking to the northeast, these beautifully lit pump jacks, visible from the park along the north side. It turns out that even though you saw a lot of wells on the map, the Badlands is really good at hiding most of the wells. The topography is such that buttes and all the little hills get in the way, and you don't see that many at once, which is probably a good thing. It would be a bit scary if you saw how many were actually there. They've also seemed to make some effort to try and paint them in colors that blend a little bit better with the landscape. This is part of Theodore Roosevelt National Park also. This is the Elkhorn Ranch unit, or the Elkhorn Ranch site. Probably the least visited of the 3 units in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Most people know about the south unit on I-94 near Medora. Maybe they've been to the north unit, which is further away and more scenic. This is a bit of an effort to get to. It's 35 miles of dirt road, and it's on the west side of the Little Missouri, so it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. But it's important and on the list and part of the park because Elkhorn Ranch is where Teddy Roosevelt came back to set up his second ranch. After both his wife and mother died in one day, he basically came back to have some solitude and hard work to mourn the loss of both of them. And Elkhorn Ranch is considered to be, in many respects, because it was a spot where Teddy Roosevelt spent a lot of time in the Badlands, the cradle of conservation. So it was a time that he spent here and in the Badlands, and some discussions with John Muir, that led to his formation of the Forest Service, the National Park Service, and ultimately protecting somewhere around 230 million acres of land. I don't think any president's gotten close to it since. Another shot of the Elk Grove Ranch site is the same cottonwood trees that are on the left that we saw in the previous shot. Little Missouri River running along there. Even though it's the cradle of conservation, though, it's right in the middle of everything. Small yellow circle, that's the Elkhorn site. Development, quite obvious around there. There's actually, if that previous shot were on Little Missouri, you turn about 180 degrees, there's actually a pump jack visible on a ridge the other direction, which might have been visible from his cabin location.
Tim,
Yep.
on that last slide, there was a kind of a path of, there we go, on the left side there. Is that following a roadway? It looks like a river almost. Through the,
Little Missouri runs about through here. There's actually, you see this bit of a gap. That's the
Okay.
Little Missouri running there, right alongside
so
there.
to the left of that, do you see the
It's this
segment?
line here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you happen to know the correlation of those?
I suspect it's a fault line.
It's probably a fault line, exactly. It's probably a geological feature more than anything. There are wells do tend to be congregated around the roads and no more than half a mile or so from the road, the existing roads, but even that's changing now as they put as many wells as they can in, eventually start building roads further and further away from the existing roads. But yeah, it's probably a geological feature visible in the placement of the wells. So Roosevelt's views on conservation, which he formulated there, the one statement which I really like the best is that we have become great because of the lavish use of our resources. But the time has come to inquire seriously what will happen when our forests are gone, when the coal, the iron, the oil, and the gas are exhausted, when the soils have still further impoverished and washed into the streams, polluting the rivers, denuding the forests, and obstructing navigation. Something he said at a conference in 1908. Wonder what he would think now. So I set the stage that I'm going to be looking at impacts on the environment, but it is important too that we realize that this is an environment that has lots of change naturally, right? Wind, rain, the Little Missouri have formed the Badlands as we know them. So it's an environment that changes quite frequently anyway. So it's important to understand that those basic features are underlying the changes to the system. This is within the South Union of Teddy Roosevelt National Park. Sedimentary rock, bentonite clay, and some lignite coal. Some of the darker bands will be lignite coal. The bands are important in that lignite coal historically was ignited either because of lightning or because of prairie fires. And once it started to burn, it could burn for years. This is a site where it's no longer burning, but is one of the 18 extraordinary places. It's called Burning Coal Vein. I think it stopped burning 20, 30 years ago, but it had burned for years and years and years. It was known as Burning Coal Vein. There's a smoke coming out of there. Nearby, there's some junipers that have an unusual growth form, which is attributed to the toxic fumes from that smoke for all those years. And so it's a very kind of unique site, but formed because of that geological feature in the burning of lignite coal. When the coal burns, it essentially bakes the clay. Geologists call this baking process, or what results from the baking process, clinker. But locally it's known as scoria. So this red clay-like stuff is a lot harder than the existing other sedimentary rock nearby. And that scoria becomes important because it's so much harder that it causes differential erosion. And so you see the caps here are the darker baked layers. And that is essentially preventing the erosion of those capped areas. So a lot of the vertical features you find in the Badlands have scoria as a part of that. They're essentially capping it, preventing the washing down of that. So this is not in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. This is out in the Little Missouri grasslands just to the northwest of the park. One of those dirt roads that nobody goes on. Pretty spectacular places outside the park too. This is the one that I don't know whether we should count as a butte or not. This is listed as Tracy Mountain. It was the only site where I was unable to take a picture of the unaltered landscape because I couldn't find an angle that didn't have oil development already in the way. That's just a little ways south of that Painted Canyon overlook. So it's south of I-94, just a little ways south of Teddy Roosevelt National Park. This is Kilder Mountain. It's a ways north in Dunn County. It's the one location, one spot of the extraordinary places which is clearly there because of historic reasons as opposed to scenic reasons. Kilder Mountain Battlefield was a site of a battle between U.S. troops and the Sioux Indians back in July 28th of 1864. And it really was a reprisal for battles between the U.S. troops and the Dakota Wars in Minnesota in 1862. U.S. troops were basically chasing the Sioux across the country trying to retaliate. This is the landscape photography in me trying to minimize the impact of oil. And for reference, you should probably note this peak, because now I'll show you a slightly different and more documentary shot. Same peak, oil tanks, pump jacks. And in some spots, the locals don't like the oil trucks either. So. The battlefield site's kind of interesting. It is on the, it's managed by the North Dakota Historical Society, but it's got a series of intimidating signs, because it really is on private property. A series of intimidating signs warning you if you trespass, you'll be fined. If you do anything, you'll be fined. So the day I drove in, I was like, well, I'll take my chances and try to stay on the road and only go to the site and nothing else.
Question, Tim, is that like a stuffed animal that's on?
Yeah, there's some stuffed animals. I don't quite know what. Yeah, some kind of strange stride.
So those are privately owned signs?
Those are privately owned signs. The road from here in is essentially a ranch road. The road to the site goes in this way. And then you have a sort of a typical Western gate with antlers and everything on it, and lots of no trespassing signs at that point. You still got to go a quarter of a mile. Because right next to it is the North Dakota Historical Society sign saying it's a quarter of a mile. I was like, which one of these should I believe? Can I keep going or not? So, yeah, the site's not very big. It's a small fenced area. It's got a couple of headstones for the few U.S. cavalry troops that were killed in the conflict, and a picnic table and a flagpole. It's a very strange little site. I have one or two shots of the site itself, but it, again, wasn't a scene of an important site. Historically important. This is West Twin Butte, which is to the west of South Union Theodore Roosevelt National Park. It is entirely privately owned and highly overgrazed. There's a sheep barn right at the base of it that they graze their sheep on there. So it doesn't have any impact because of oil wells, but it has other impacts. West Twin Butte from an angle, this is the sort of blazing in your face, extraordinary place, and the pump jack. But I didn't do that very often. So I decided that was not a lot of fun. Entire length of the Little Missouri River is fair game. This also happens to be in the north unit of the Roosevelt National Park. Lots of development around that portion of the park as well. I didn't put in a well map. There's a lot of development there. It's not very far that you have to drive north of here to start seeing man camps that are on the south side of Wofford City. So the last sort of educational material that I'll interject is about water usage in the fracking process. I originally was thinking about calling the project oil and water, because they don't mix, but there's a lot of other connotations to it. Fracking, or hydraulic fracturing, this is a rig that's drilling a well. They'll drill down in the Bakken, they down in horizontally, and then they inject a mixture of water, fine sand, and a bunch of proprietary chemicals as well. Inject it down into the rock to cause the rock to fracture. That's why it's called fracking. It opens the pockets up for the oil to seep back in and be pulled up. It takes the fracking process itself, the opening of a new well, takes 2 million gallons of water. And it turns out that the wells in the Bakken formation is very salty, and so the well holes themselves need to be flushed with fresh water on a regular basis in order, they call it maintenance water, in order to keep the oil flowing well. And from the oil and gas website, they suggest it takes another 6.5 to 9 million gallons of water over the life of the well, so 3 to 4 times what it took to fracture the well. You start doing the math, we're talking 8.5 to 11 million gallons of water per well. As of May, there are 12,600 wells in the Bakken in western North Dakota, not the Bakken itself, not counting what's in Montana. 12,600 wells there. Again, the industry estimates are that at full capacity, there may be as many as 40 to 45,000 wells. And so you start multiplying the water usage by the number of wells, and again, off of the industry site, the estimates are it will take roughly 7 to 11 billion gallons of water a year for the next couple of decades to sustain this. And what adds to the problem, of course, is that the water is contaminated by those proprietary chemicals, some of which are carcinogens and various other problems. The drill cuttings themselves are radioactive. They're part of the mix. So you've got this radioactive, highly briny, highly salty soup that comes back up. The water that comes back up is essentially useless for any other purposes. And so we're using all this water, and they take it and they find a dry well where they didn't get a well, and they inject it back down to get rid of it. So use the water once, throw it away by injecting it down below the water table. Is the idea. There's not been any suggestion that it's causing problems with the water table here, but if you look at information about fracking in other locations, there's suggestions it's contaminating the water table as well. So. And again, industry sites say that, well, 5% of the wastewater wells will fail a year, and once you have enough wells, of course, eventually some of them will fail and contaminate the water. The other issue with this wastewater is that there are a fair number of spills in pipelines and other things before it even gets underground, right? It gets spilled into various locations. It spills in farmers' fields, and it's so toxic that even thistles won't grow in the areas where it's spilled. So it contaminates the land for years, and it's essentially unusable. And some of it does end up spilling into places like the Little Missouri and Sakakawea, where it's supposed to be drinking water. So at some point we have to be concerned about the levels of wastewater that are being spilled into those locations. I was just impressed by this. I didn't quite see it, but there's 3 rigs drilling simultaneously within half a mile of each other. At peak production 2 years ago, there were only something like 209 rigs in the state. So to see 3 of them that close together surprised me. The rig count now is down to, what I looked at today, somewhere around 70 because of the lower prices. They're not drilling as much as they used to. But I was out to the same location in March, and it turns out that while they're not drilling wholesale everywhere, areas like this that are highly productive, where they know they're still going to hit oil, they're still drilling like crazy in those areas. So the 70 rigs that remain are focused in very productive areas. So they're still working areas, they're just working areas where they know they're not going to waste money. Yeah, this was meant to be on screen when I was talking about spillage. I'm standing basically on the banks of the Little Missouri, rig drilling up on the top there. A lot of them along the ridge top, so it's all seems like a risk to me. So I've really only started the project. I've had about 4 trips out there, a little over a year that I've covered intermittently. Ideally, I'll end up with a small traveling show that'll go to regional sites. I'd like to end up pushing it back out west, get it into Minot, Bismarck, Dickinson. I really want it to be part of the dialogue and have the educational materials available for people to think about sort of the risks and rewards that are available, because the government's telling us all the great economic benefits of what's going on out there, but there's not, in my mind, not enough caution about what we're doing out there. So I'd like to be sort of part of the dialogue that at least says, well, maybe oil is a necessary evil, but let's think about the risks and rewards of what we're doing. One more quote from Teddy Roosevelt. Here is your country. Cherish these natural wonders. Cherish the natural resources. Cherish the history and romance as a sacred heritage for your children and your children's children. Do not let selfish men or greedy interests skin your country or its beauty, its riches, or its romance. So I'd like to thank FMVA, Sarah, for setting this up for me, Plains for hosting it, and funders. Arts Partnership, Susie Epper-Grisher grant, and then some money that I got from both small shows that I've had at TMI Hospitality and now at Myriad Mobile. So they've all helped fund it in part to make sure that I get this work done. So thanks, I'll answer questions.
Yeah, thanks for the shout out. I have a couple of questions actually. One of them is a little more involved, the other a little quicker. When I was looking at your work combining the extraordinary places and the oil industry, the ones that you tend to shy away of, that there are just a few of, you mentioned that you felt that they were too blatant, kind of in a propaganda kind of way. Has anyone ever said to you, or have you ever considered that it's propaganda in the other direction? Because they're so beautiful.
Yeah, I've actually worried that, I'm worried that someday I'll be approached by an oil company and they'll want to use it on their annual reports. Yep.
They're beautiful,
Yep.
and it wouldn't
And I
surprise me if
think
you
it's
were.
partly me, though. The way I approach the landscapes, I cannot sort of turn off the way I approach the landscape when I turn around and photograph the oil development. And so it still is romanticized in some of the same ways that I romanticize the landscape. And so I sort of have to try and figure out how to either make that switch when I'm in the field, that I go between shooting these romantic fine art landscape shots and essentially documentary, or I have to just go out there on one trip and go, this time documentary only. Don't shoot the pretty landscape even if you see it.
The quote that you read was so heart-wrenching and bone-chilling. I can't imagine removing your emotion from these landscapes. They're beautiful.
I think that's the hard part, yeah. So, yeah.
The other question I had was, is there any commitment on the oil company's behalf to have to remove the equipment, or will the equipment on the surface itself continue to degrade and rust, and also the environmental impact of it being there for 100+ years?
I don't know of any plans to remove it, and there are wells out there from previous buildings, right? And you can usually tell
Yeah.
those because they're not painted in the same nice tan that the newer ones are.
So it'll just continue to become
Yeah,
a
they'll essentially be
collection
an eyesore of the
of
landscape and potential risks to the landscape from seepage. And,
serious concern.
yeah. Now, I'm sure it's not factored into their economic model to have to tear down all that stuff and clean up afterwards.
The pipelines are what's scary, not in the rates, because the pipelines will fill them with toxic chemical,
Yeah.
keep them from freezing and stuff, and they'll sit.
Yep, until they rust.
And then they move in the cold weather.
Yep,
I've seen pictures where they'll move up to 12 to 15 feet.
yep. I know somebody who, you probably know, some of them may know him as well, Aaron Barth, who worked out there for a while. And he was talking to people who were laying the pipelines, and they were saying that it is a dicey business laying pipelines out there. Question?
Tim, did you have to pack into any of these sites, or are there sites that you will have to pack into?
There are sites that I haven't been to, like the one that I have the least photographs of is Bullion Butte, which is one of the biggest buttes there. But it's in one of the backcountry recreation areas on Little Missouri, and there's very few roads that are close by. You can see it from great distances because it's so big. Like when you're in the Medora area, you can see it close by. Like it's in the background, I guess, when you're watching the stage at Medora, right? So it's in the background. This is the background of my original shot with Pump Jack. It's there. So that I haven't gotten to because it's so far off of all the beaten tracks. It's big enough though I can still shoot it at 10 miles away and probably get parts of it. There are spots.
When you're looking at the water usage, the gallons, how many acres, did you calculate the acre feet in that? And then have you made a comparison to the municipal water usage, say in Fargo or Bismarck, or in terms of acre feet or whatever,
Right.
as a comparison, so that there's some kind of a context to that?
Yeah, I've seen people try to do the calculations. I haven't gone through and been satisfied that they were quotable yet. So the oil industry, of course, will point out that their water usage is inconsequential compared to agriculture.
Yeah, but that's data that you need to compare.
Yeah, exactly. Something that's a bit better metric, right?
Compare and contrast.
Yeah, and I started going down the path of trying to find out essentially what acre feet was in terms of, how much of Lake Sakakawea is it, or, is it in something with a frame of reference, I agree. And I haven't done that yet, so I've looked at some of those things, but I haven't been satisfied with the calculations yet. And the sites that I found didn't provide it in that way, so.
Yeah, you have to do the math on that.
Yep.
Where are they getting their water from? It's from wells or where did you?
Sakakawea, but mostly out of wells. The water usage is additionally concerning because most of the western part of the state is relatively dry. 15 inches of rain or less a year, so it's like, it seems like a crazy spot to be using lots and lots of water. But it's mostly coming out of wells.
Is it hard to, do you think the photographs actually capture the ugliness of the oil?
I think that's to Melissa's point. I think I haven't quite done that yet, so I have to sort of.
I mean, is it hard to capture the ugliness with the camera?
No, I don't think so. And there are other photographers who've worked in the Bakken that approach it with a different perspective, more of a documentary photographer's perspective, and it looks grittier and rougher than anything I do. So I know it's partly the way I approach it, and I need to either change that approach or find a way to make the point, if you will, right? Not make it look pretty.
You mentioned
mentioned that in other places the water tables have been contaminated after a while. What would be the implications if the water table in western North Dakota was contaminated?
I'm not sure. In some other highly populated areas, the concern is, drinking water gets contaminated. You can find various videos of people essentially lighting their taps because there's so much methane coming through from seeping in and into the water table. So
There's some strange video.
there are some strange videos of what's going on. It seems like it could have implications, not only to the people, but also to the agriculture too. You have to start worrying about where that water is being used. Back to the agriculture being the bigger usage, at least the water they use can recycle in the system. It's not like, you use it once and it's so contaminated, you have to pump it 12,000 feet underground.
In your trips, have you been approached by anybody that's come across you taking pictures, or?
No, I keep thinking that was going to happen someday. Yep. And the first time before I went out, I'm an environmentalist, so I was thinking, what happens when the guy in the oil truck stops and asks me what I was doing today? So, and so I tried to be aware of and sensitive to the fact that whoever I run into out there, they may have a very different view of how things are going out there and how important it is economically. And sort of the difficult part is that many of the places out west, they do, some people at least, like the economic benefits. Not everybody. There are some farmers where their land is kind of destroyed by the process. But it's a very set of mixed emotions, right? And you know that when you're traveling out there that there are people that are very pro, some that are not, and so you've got to sort of approach everything very cautiously. But I haven't been approached yet. Maybe my size will work to my advantage. I'm not going to get approached that much, but yeah, there's a retired West Fargo policeman who's actually from the Killdeer area, and he's wanted to go back out there. He's offered to go with me, and I'm like, oh, a policeman with me, that would be good. Maybe that would solve that problem should it ever happen.
So how long a project is this going to be?
I imagine that I'll probably work it hard for a couple of years initially, 3 to 5 years, till I'm satisfied I have a big enough set of initial images, if you will. And then already imagine that I'd like to revisit it 5 or 10 years down the road and look at how things have changed, because in some spots the change is pretty rapid and I'm surprised by it. Like that picture where I showed you the 3 rigs, that was July of last year. And I was back there in March. And of course, those were all capped with pump jacks. They were done. It's only a 3 or 4 week process to drill. So they're all capped with pump jacks. But between July and March, there was a wastewater disposal well and that flare that I showed. Those are all new in the 6 months as well. So it's like the drilling was done itself. Pump jacks were running, but now there was the associated infrastructure, wastewater wells and flaring. All of that springing up. So in some spots, the landscape's being altered rapidly, depending on how much development is happening. So I could go back fairly frequently.
Are there any governmental agencies that are documenting that progress in that same historian capacity that you are?
I don't know.
Your work could be real valuable.
Yeah, they're not hiding in some ways because the well maps I showed you are publicly available on the oil and gas website. So they're not hiding what's happening, which is good. They're maybe not making a big deal of it, but they're not hiding it. So.
All right, well, if there's no further questions, thank you everyone again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your night. I know the museum, the exhibits are free admission. We've got until 9, I believe. John, is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so feel free to continue the conversations, snacks, exhibits, thank you again.